So now coming to America, 1900, Joseph P. Freud, they called him Josephie. He was a Viennese magician in Austria, and he came to Chicago at the age of 19 and worked in a magic shop and had a mechanical creation he called Bellissimo, which was a living, he called it a living skull, right? And this living skull was fabricated from painted copper, inserted with real human teeth, and would answer any question put to it with its, what they called its clicking jaw.
So we're moving into the concept where rather than taking the whole head, they're taking pieces of the head, and then the rest of it is mechanical. And yep, so rather than having to have the whole thing, you just have to have a piece of the head, and then you can recreate the rest of the head around that piece.
Right, right. And now, so we're at 1900, and in America, right? This is in Chicago that this guy's making this head. But this is also around and here we're gonna take a brief minute to cover the invention of television, basically, right? So in 1887. Hertz discovers waves for the first time. In his initial discovery, called On Electromagnetic Effects Produced by Electrical Disturbances in Insulators. And later he would publish details following a series of experiments he carried out in 1888. And then 1888, the same year, this guy Edward Bellamy, who's an American author and journalist and activist, in his book Looking Backwards, he predicts that the transmission of sermons and music for the masses on musical telephones would basically be in the future, right? And this was 1895. We have Marconi, who basically was the first one to take radio waves and to be able to transmit them over several kilometers, sending us basically a transmission, a signal, much like what we're talking about with these heads basically being used to transmit messages and to lock into the underworld. So in 1899, E.A. Wallace Budge, in his Egyptian Magic, reveals the Bornless ritual, which is basically about a headless body. So but it's Aleister Crowley ended up picking this ritual up, but it's basically the headless rites. So it has to do with the taking of the head on some level. But then in 1903, the Telefunken Corporation is founded, and basically they were using communication for Zeppelin navigation, 1908 to 1918, in what was called the first worldwide communication system, right? So then, 1916, RCA executive David Sarnoff, in a memo, he says they have a plan of development which would make radio a utility, an idea to bring music into the home wirelessly. The receiver can be designed in the form of a simple radio music box. So now when you look at these radio music boxes, again, back to the Terafim, you have wood and you have electrical components and you have all the exact same mechanism that they were using in these ancient devices to be able to communicate, right? Only now we're using science and basically utilizing the ether, which is what we believe these astral entities traveled in, and we're discovering that we can send messages on waves and basically bringing about the television itself, right? Let's see. So, and this was also in 1918 was when the Skull and Bones Society or the what is it, the trust, I can't remember the name of the trust, the Russell Trust at Yale University, which is essentially Skull and Bones, right? This was the same year in 1918 that they went and stole Geronimo's skull and brought it back to Yale University. And again, what are they using the skull for in their rituals? Again, they set it on the two leg bones, like we talked about earlier, going back to the Knights Templar, going back to the pirates. And indeed, Yale is the opium runners of the privateers of the Queen come and set up shop in America, so it kind of all ties in.
Yeah, I was even going to mention a lot of these old radios, if you really look at them, they almost give the impression of almost trying to, like, they were almost trying to look like a face.
Yeah.
So it almost kind of seems like the talking heads concept, they were trying to, like, hide within the radio. Because I'm not saying every single one, but a lot of them kind of have this regular design where you have the two knobs and then the big speaker underneath. So it almost kind of looks like eyes, and then the mouth is the speaker itself. So I think that they were also just trying to symbolically hide the concept of like a head without being too direct within the visual of these old speakers.
It's a well. So now, when we get to 1925, right, October 2nd in Hastings, England, we have John Logie Bard. He's a Scottish inventor, and he's the first one that successfully transmits a television picture in grayscale and 32 vertical lines scanned at 5 pictures per second, right? And when he made this first transmission of television signals, right? What they did, they used it was the head of Stucky Bill, is what they called him, right? And this was the head of a ventriloquist dummy, right? And they put it up and basically filmed it with its eyes moving and its mouth chattering, and then they broadcast that signal, and that was the first ever television signal, was a disembodied talking head.
Talk about hidden in plain sight. Holy crap, dude.
Like I said, the more you go down some of these rabbit holes, man, just the crazier it gets. You know what I mean?
Dude, because I like, at least for a lot of the old inventors, I mean, I'm assuming it's probably just as prevalent today because people want to try to pretend like everything's science-based, but realistically, everything's occult-based.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just master understandings of sciences that are just magic until they actually have like a name behind them or they're discovered by society. Like, a lot of people, I like to throw this kind of concept out that a lot of like the MK Ultra programming and a lot of the like occult practice seems to be like a master understanding of psychology.
Yep.
So if you want to get into like all these old world concepts and the possibility that the world could have been restarted and, refreshed multiple times,
right,
then, there could be thousands of years worth of understanding of these particular sciences, and they just hide them behind this magic concept, even though they're looking at it from like a scientific perspective. And now it's like on a vice versa flip,
right,
that now they're pretending like they're doing everything in the name of science, but realistically they're just bringing back these old occult practices, or they have an understanding of them and then they're hiding them in mainstream science. And then in turn, by hiding things in science, you have normal people getting involved with these things, possibly even rituals, without even realizing they're involved in them.
right, like the Superb Owl or the Super Bowl.
Yep. Or even just phones in general. Every single phone that you have is a communication device, and it's a black mirror. Every single TV, it's there.
Yeah, 100%. So now in 1928, General Electric created an experimental TV station called WZXCW in Schenectady, New York, where they broadcasted 3 times weekly for half an hour, right? And this was mostly for executives higher. And then if we go 1935, Nazi Germany had a 180 line system broadcasting to 300 of the highest ranking Nazis, right? And in 1936, the Nazis broadcast the Olympic Games. And so what the Nazis would do is they would actually film the event, and then they would develop the film in like 2 minutes, and then they would air it from the film. So they didn't actually have like the studio cameras for live stuff. They would just do a secondary run of it, right? In 1936, the same year that the Nazis were transmitting the Olympics, was the year that Bell Laboratories developed the exact same coaxial cables that we use right now for our cable, right? And they called it the TV pipe, is what they called the coaxial cable, right? And By 1937, televisions became commercially available in America for $500. And in 1939, RCA announces